When does a person get more angry? Is it when they get hit by a strong straight or when they are hit 5 or 6 times by annoying jabs? It is, of course, the latter. Kale threw 5 jabs before he was hit. Which means, 1 jab should be okay. Are you heading out? Yes. There were not many people left in the tea shop. It was past 9 p.m. This was the time when there were more people in the bars than tea shops. Since this was the time that the people mining in the pits went to drink. The bar should be full of people. I look forward to your next visit, young master. Kale nodded his head at Billows's statement. The tea was great. Kale shared his observations with Billows. And the book was good even though I only got through half of it. I especially liked the main character whose abilities are appreciated and the way he grows. In that instant, the corner of Billows's eyebrows frowned for a moment before returning to normal. His eyes were cloudy as he observed Kale. However, Kale did not notice, as he was trying to remember the contents of the book. He was too worried about Choi Han that he did not pay too much attention to it. However, it was still fun to read while having this sense of urgency in his heart. It might be an auto setting from possessing the original Kale's body. But Kale was able to understand the language of this world, and had no issues reading and enjoying the book. A smile formed on Kale's face as he continued to speak to Billows, who was standing there with a blank expression on his face. Don't let anyone else read that book. So that I can read it whenever I come. This truly was the immature son of the Count, who was trying to monopolize someone else's property. Billows, the bastard son of a wealthy merchant guild, might not like it. But what could he do? Kale was the son of the Count. Yes, I will reserve this book only for young Master Kale. However, Billows's response was different from what Kale expected. Billows smiled brightly as he urged Kale to come back soon. Please come again soon. I will be waiting for you. Sure, whatever. Kale didn't want to go, but had to leave to go meet Choi Han. Ring. The bell rang once more and it suddenly felt like the tea shop became louder once Kale left. However, it was even louder outside the tea shop than it was inside. Even though this territory was far from the capital, the fact that a lot of artists resided here and that they had a special product made it a popular location. These individuals, as well as the miners who were looking to relax after a long day in the mines, all were out late to drink. Kale walked that street alone. If you think about it, he really is a unique person. Normally in fantasies or martial arts novels, the trash of the family tend to hang out with the gangsters or bad crowds. They drink, fool around with women, and cause a ruckus on the streets or stores. The funny thing was that Kale Hanatus actually hated gangsters and scammers. In fact, he despised them. He thought that they were all scumbags. The worst of all scumbags. It was better to at least be the citizens who worked hard even though there was no hopes for a better future. That was why he never beat people up when he was drunk but had no issues throwing things at the gangsters he saw. Well, attempted to throw things, since his aim when drunk was terrible. Maybe that was the reason. Agu, young master, you're here? The owner of the bar was extremely afraid of Kale. It was because of that one day when Kale broke pretty much everything around where he was sitting to drink. In fact, Kale was probably number 1 on the blacklist for Western City bars. He did not respond to the owner's greeting and just threw a gold coin at him. Bring a bottle of my usual. Oh, and roasted chicken breast. Don't put salt on it. Excuse me? Why? You don't want to find a seat first? Kale started to frown. The owner immediately waved his hands and bowed his head. Immediately. I will bring it immediately. The owner was moving quickly, but it looked like he was smiling. It was because it looked like Kale was not planning on sitting down. Kale looked around the bar that became quiet once he walked in. Everyone was avoiding his gaze and turned their heads. It was like they were wondering why he had to choose this bar of all bars in the city. The gangsters and scammers in the bar were all extremely nervous right now. Tisk. The sound of Kale clicking his tongue could be heard through the silence in the bar. Young master, here is the bottle you requested. Great. Kale grabbed the bottle and bag of chicken. It was the alcohol he drank often. It was probably the most expensive alcohol in this bar. He accepted the bottle with no regret and left the bar. Kale immediately opened the bottle and drank about half of it as soon as he stepped out of the bar. Oh, the alcohol tasted pretty good. Since Kale had a high tolerance to alcohol, it did not affect him at all to drink half of the bottle at once. He just flushed easily, making people think he was a lightweight. Kale quickly walked along with the bottle in his hand. He walked back past the tea shop he stayed in all day until he saw the guards stiffen up after seeing him. Seeing them acting like that made him want to go out of the gate. But unfortunately, that was not his destination. Ah, I'm starting to get hot. Kale felt himself heating up as he continued to drink. He walked a bit further until he reached the city wall not too far away. The tall city wall that started at the gate seemed to defend against any potential intruders. Well, it depends on the person. Kale recalled the information from the book. Approximately 100 steps from the city gate. That was the location where Choi Han jumped over the city wall. Kale clenched the bottle in his hand as he quickly ran toward the location. There were not many people on the streets because it was the residential area. Kale took a deep breath once he arrived at the calculated location. Exactly 100 steps away from the city gate. It was a corner of the residential area, so there wasn't any other light other than the torch the guards put on top of the wall, as well as the lights coming out of the residential windows. But that was enough light. Kale slowly approached his destination after letting his eyes adjust to the dark. Just as I expected, he could see something curled up underneath the city wall. Actually, there were multiple things. Delicate-looking things that were shaking because of the cold. Kale continued to walk toward the location. He could hear the voices of the curled-up lifeforms. Meow meow. 2 cats were meowing as they lay curled up underneath the city wall. Kale started to smile. It's right here. He found the right spot. The moment Choi Han jumps over the wall, a baby kitten is body slammed by the alpha cat of the neighborhood and gets sent tumbling to the city wall. Choi Han quickly twists his body to avoid landing on the kitten. This was a world where coincidences played a big role. He really is a good guy. Choi Han twists his ankle after unexpectedly twisting his body to avoid hurting the kitten. He had run like crazy to reach Western City after killing tens of people for the first time and burying the corpses of the villagers. His body had reached its limit, making him unable to land properly after making such a movement. Meow meow. Kale gazed at the kitten that was curled up and shaking, as well as the other kitten that seemed to be its sibling licking the shaking kitten. He then turned his gaze. He turned to look at one of the alleys that was close to where was standing. He could see him. I found him. The man who was wincing in pain while looking like one of the homeless that lived in the slums. Kale could see the shaggy black hair and the old and burnt clothes. According to the novel, Kale and Choi Han would meet tomorrow. Tonight was the night Kale got drunk and got the scar on his side. Things were already different than in the novel, even though it was just minor details. Kale stood up as he had crouched down to look at the kittens. Choi Han must have felt his gaze from a few moments ago. As Choi Han slowly raised his head and his eyes focused on Kale through his shaggy black hair. Damn it, I'm shaking. Kale could hear his heart going crazy. Although it was too dark to see clearly, Choi Han's eyes that Kale could see through his hair were extremely cold. Kale thought that it was a good idea that he chose to drink. Kale congratulated himself for making such a smart decision and calmed himself down as much as possible. Jab. He needed to launch a jab and leave a good first impression. Kale took a deep breath as he started to speak to Choi Han, who was staring at him. You look like you are hungry. Tisk tisk. Kale clicked his tongue and took the chicken breast out of the bag. Then with an extremely gentle movement, Kale offered the roasted chicken breast not to Choi Han, but to the kittens. You poor things. Go ahead and eat it. Kale didn't know that the kittens would be this small. He hoped that they could still eat the chicken breast. Tisk. He clicked his tongue as he ripped the chicken breast into pieces so that the kittens could eat it better. He was wondering what the hell he was doing crouching here feeding these kittens. To be honest, Kale did not like cats. However, Choi Han treasured small animals. Gruel. Gruel. The injured kitten must have understood Kale's dislike for cats, as it showed its teeth and started to growl. But Kale started to pet the kitten's silver fur as he looked into its golden eyes. The kitten must not have liked it. as it did its best to avoid Kale's hand. You poor things. Eat this and get better soon. He didn't even look at Choi Han when he said that. However, he was thinking that Choi Han was definitely looking at him. Do you have somewhere to go? He did not hear a response. However, Kale continued to speak. The guards would soon come to patrol this area, and he needed to make a move before Choi Han started to limp away to avoid the guards. Or a place to stay? Kale petted the growling silver-furred kitten with golden eyes and pushed away the red kitten that was trying to attack him as he asked. The red kitten kept trying to hit Kale for some reason. Its golden eyes, that matched its sibling's eyes, shined brightly even in the darkness. But Kale needed to focus on Choi Han. Are you hungry? There still was no response. Kale had expected this. Choi Han was probably observing him right now. But he also probably wanted to rest. Both his body and mind had reached their limit. In addition, he had received a huge shock just the other day. For someone like Choi Han who had lived on his own without any human contact other than the villagers of that small village, Western City was completely foreign to him. He may have lived for tens of years already. But he was still young. Are you not going to say anything? Why are you talking to me? Choi Han finally seemed to have decided that Kale was weak. Kale was weak enough that he could easily kill him even though he was at his limits. That was why Choi Han felt that it would be okay to accept Kale's goodwill even though he had no idea why Kale was being nice to him. Kale stood up and walked toward Choi Han. The guards would soon come patrolling through this location. Hey, he could see Choi Han's situation better once he got closer. He was a mess. However, maybe it was because he was the main character. But his eyes were clear. The black hair and black pupils that showed that Choi Han was Korean were actually quite nice to see. That was why Kale smiled as he casually spoke to Choi Han. Follow me. I'll feed you. The best first impression was to be the one who provides delicious food. Choi Han stopped leaning against the wall and pushed his body up. His body was leaning to his left probably because his right ankle was uncomfortable. But Kale did not help him or say anything about him. There was no reason to be any nicer to him than he had already been. Kale told Choi Han to follow him as he headed toward the Count's estate. However, an existence blocked his path. Meow. The red-furred golden-eyed kitten ran toward Kale and rubbed its cheeks on Kale's shoes. Kale started to frown. He didn't like cats, but this one seemed pretty cute. However, he suddenly felt chills all over his body and turned around. Choi Han was staring at him. Damn it. Kale awkwardly started to pet the kitten. It seems like it likes me. But I have to go. See you next time. Kale never understood why people talked to animals. However, Kale, who had now become that person that was speaking to animals, quickly stood back up and walked away from the kitten. Gruel. The silver-furred golden-eyed kitten growled as if it was telling the red-furred kitten to come back while telling Kale to get lost. The red-furred kitten seemed to not want to go back as it continued to look back at Kale as it walked away. However, Kale did not turn back. Meow. Mew. The sad cries of the kittens were getting farther away. Kale took a peek backwards. Choi Han was limping, but keeping up with him. They made eye contact once more. Kale flinched as he quickly turned his head back. He was walking slowly to make it easier for Choi Han to keep up. They passed the residential area and Kale took another sip of the alcohol. The bars, market, plaza. They then passed the residences of the wealthy and finally arrived at the Count's estate located in the rear of the city. What are you doing? Kale looked toward Choi Han, who had stopped moving. Choi Han must have seen how the soldiers greeted Kale, as well as how the citizens avoided him. On their way here, Choi Han was probably questioning whether it really would be easy to kill Kale. Kale asked once more, "Are you not going to come?" As expected, Choi Han resumed walking. His reason for following Kale now was probably to get some information as well as to host the funeral for the villagers of Harris Village. Why, young master? As soon as Kale stood at the main entrance of the estate, the guards and knights stumbled over their words as they greeted him. Sigh. I wish they would stop with that why, young master business. It was odd hearing them stumbling over their words every time. Since he possessed the body of a trash, he was trying his best to act like one. It was easier to be a trash young master than a noble young master. He was trying to make his life as easy as possible. Kale frowned at the guard's stumbling of words while the guards quickly opened the gate. Please head on in. Kale turned back to look at Choi Han. The rest of them looked at Choi Han as well. They were probably curious about this beggar that followed their young master back. The knights observed Choi Han with suspicion in their eyes. Follow me. Choi Han should know of Kale's status by now. He continued to limp as he approached Kale. Kale looked calm and turned back as soon as he saw that Choi Han was behind him and entered through the gate. But his heart was going crazy. I'm sure he's thinking about taking me as a hostage if something dangerous happens. That is probably why he stood right behind me. He was sure that Choi Han would not kill him. However, just thinking about being taken as hostage caused serious mental strain that Kale frowned as he looked at the two knights who were following them. Don't follow me. The knights flinched at Kale's clear order. They looked back and forth between Kale and Choi Han before one of the knights approached Choi Han and Kale with a stiff expression on his face. The knights cared about their creed more than anything else. It was fitting of the knights that Daruth treasured. Well, I guess they have to act like this to be good knights. Kale was satisfied at the knight's response to this beggar-like foreigner and left the knight alone to follow them. He just led Choi Han to the entrance of the count's residence. Young master, you're back. Yes. Ron. This scary old man. He had been waiting for Kale outside the door. Kale didn't expect him to really be waiting. Kale was scared, but thought that it was actually for the better. Ron's gaze turned toward Choi Han, and his benign smile suddenly stiffened. Ron should be at a level where he can estimate Choi Han's strength. Choi Han also stared back at Ron. Kale didn't care what kind of attacks they were sending each other through their eyes and did what he needed to do. He was not done just yet. Follow me. Kale called out to Choi Han once more and started to walk. The servant, Ron, quickly followed Kale. Young master, what is going on? I will take care of this guest if you tell me what is needed. No need. Someone else approached Kale as Ron was speaking. Young master, you returned after drinking today. It was the deputy butler Hans. Ah, he was responsible for me. Kale clicked his tongue and ignored Hans's statement. Instead, he lifted up the alcohol bottle and pointed toward Hans. It was at that moment. Ach! Hans covered his face with both of his arms as he curled up. Silence filled the air. Tisk. Kale clicked his tongue and Hans looked up with a face completely red from embarrassment as he looked back at Kale. Put this away. Yes. Hans received the alcohol bottle from Kale with a blank expression on his face. I will actually throw it at you next time. Hans turned pale at Kale's words. Kale did not seem to care at all as he continued to walk. With the inclusion of Hans, there were now a total of 4 people following him. Kale peeked every so often to make sure they were following him properly and arrived at his destination. Kitchen number 2. Kale pushed the door open as soon as he saw the sign. Young master? He could hear Hans's confused voice behind him. However, there was a thick smile on Kale's face. The end was near. Now, Beecrox and Choi Han will meet. Kale's heart was beating fast. The door easily opened. Kale's expression stiffened at the scene in front of him inside the door. Clang, clang. Second Chef Beecrox was smiling while sharpening his blade. He seemed to be enjoying himself while sharpening his blade all alone in kitchen number 2. However, that smile disappeared as soon as he saw Kale. That was why Kale was scared. It was always scary to deal with lunatics. You never knew what crazy things a lunatic would do. Kale made a move before Beecrox could respond. He put a hand on Choi Han's shoulder and pointed at him. Give him something to eat. Excuse me? Beecrox asked with a stiff expression on his face. The sharp blade in his hand was shining as it reflected the light. Kale calmed his shaking heart as he said it once more. Give him something to eat. He's hungry. Ho! The knight let out a shocked noise from the back. But Kale did not have the time to pay attention to that right now. He waited for Beecrox's response with anxiety. Finally, Beecrox answered with a stiff expression still on his face. I will do as you instructed. Young master. It was done. Beecrox and Choi Han, and even Ron, someone that he did not expect. The 3 of them were connected now. A bright smile formed on Kale's face. He could finally relax as he gave Beecrox another order with a slightly higher tone. Also prepare something for me. I'm hungry. Kale thought about the steak from last night's dinner. Your steak last night was the best. You are a great chef. The tip of Beecrox's knife slightly shook. Something like that steak would be a wonderful meal. Prepare it quickly. Kale turned around without waiting for Beecrox's response. He then left the kitchen and headed towards his chamber. The knight and Hans followed him. And Hans quickly asked, "What should I do about that guest?" "I guess he is my guest. You take care of it." Since he connected the three of them, he didn't want to deal with anything else for today. Beecrox and Ron should be able to tell Choi Han's strength. In the novel, Beecrox originally swears his loyalty to Choi Han because of his strength. So he should pledge his loyalty after figuring out Choi Han's strength this time too. Of course, Kale had some other plans in the case that Beecrox was unable to determine Choi Han's strength. All Kale had to do was make Choi Han beat someone or something up, without it being him. Oh, and Beecrox had to be there to watch. Even if it might have some holes. Kale had thought about a lot of different things. Hans, stop annoying me and just bring the meal over to my chamber when it's ready. As expected, Ron did not follow him. Kale left the knight and Hans outside his chamber door as he closed the door and laid down on the bed. He was happy. His exhaustion and the alcohol made him fall asleep before the food ever showed up. That was why he did not know that Beecrox's cooking knife slashed toward Choi Han's neck and that Ron's sharp dagger was flung toward Choi Han's heart. Of course, both of their attacks had failed. Well, this was actually a situation that nobody, other than the three involved individuals, would know about.